Hi, it's my pleasure to welcome everybody here to the annual Neil Aggett Labour Studies lecture. I should just talk a bit about the background to the lecture, introduce the speaker, and indicate what we're trying to do here. The lecture is held in honor of Dr. Neil Hudson Aggett. He died in an apartheid prison in 1982. He was a young man in his late 20s. He was caught up in an arrest. There were sweeps done in those days by the apartheid government. The security branch in particular was notorious for these crackdowns. People would be brought in on what was called detention without trial. Normally, if you are arrested, you are charged. You have access to a lawyer, to family. There's a timeline for what must happen. When you're charged, you can defend yourself. Detention without trial, which was introduced in around 1963, allowed people to be held for 90 days without access to a lawyer, without access to family, with no charge. And this could be extended almost indefinitely. Neil Aggett himself was born in Kenya in 1953. He moved to South Africa with his family at the age of 10. He went to school down here in what was then Grahamstown, now Makanda, at Kingswood College. And he went on to study medicine at the University of Cape Town, or UCT. But like many young white Democrats of his generation, he was drawn into the rising new unionism, emerging, expanding labor movement of the time. He was one of a generation of white Democrats who rejected the apartheid order in which they were raised. He served his internship at Black public hospitals in Umtata and Tembisa. And when he completed his studies in 1977, he worked at what is now Chris Hani Baragwanath in Soweto. Neil believed that the ill health of Black workers, the suffering, the problems that people faced were rooted in the apartheid order in which people lived, that health problems were not individual problems only, but were linked to the society in which we live. He threw himself into the new unionism of the 70s. This was being built primarily among Black, African, and colored workers. It was increasingly confronting the power of big capital and the apartheid state. You must remember in those days, in the 70s, there were no equal trade union rights for Black African workers. There was some access to labor rights for workers of other races, but in all cases, there were numerous exclusions, which sectors were covered, what rights you had. Being a unionist in those days was a high-risk proposition. It wasn't a career, it was a sacrifice that you undertook. Neil worked as a doctor, taking heavy shifts, and in his time off, he worked for the labor movement. Initially for the Industrial Aid Society, where he volunteered, later for the African Food and Canning Workers Union. This was linked to the Food and Canning Workers Union, a union which dated back to the 1940s, which was registered, which was a survivor, had previously been an affiliate of the South African Congress of Trade Unions. The union was not able to pay him a salary. He worked for the union in his time off. So every day he would grind out in the grim conditions of the hospital, dealing with the human misery of the health system in a highly unequal racist society. And after that, he would go work for the union and then catch some sleep. He was a dedicated trade unionist, but also an effective one. Played a key role in setting up a key African Food and Canning Workers Union branch at Fatty's and Moni's, the guys that make pasta. One of their strikes there became a major symbol of struggle because it was an important case in which communities joined the strike through a massive boycott. Youth, the unemployed, households were all drawn into this. The 1980s witnessed the formation of growing popular resistance to apartheid. The politicization of the trade union movement became a cause of great concern for the state. Trade unionists were banned. That meant from public activity. In some cases, it meant even in your own house, you could not have 4 people, 5 people with you at a time. The security police was used to weed out trade unionists. And in one of the waves of repression on 27 November 1981, Neil, young man, 27, was among those arrested. 70 days later, he was found dead in a cell at the notorious John Vorster Square, police headquarters in Johannesburg. It's still there, still used, I think. Still a police station. Oh, yeah. But that was not the place you wanted to go in those days. He was the 51st person to die in detention since the 90-day detention without trial law was passed. His death was seen as an attack on the growing interracial, or what we would say non-racial, and African-based trade unions. And his union, the African Food and Canning Workers Union, issued a call for a half-hour work stoppage on 11th February 1982 to mourn his death. In other words, a general strike, but for a short period. It's estimated that 100,000 workers responded to the call. His funeral was attended by 20,000 people. His death galvanized outrage at the system. Workers were not convinced by the government's story that he committed suicide. His trade union, African Food and Canning Workers Union, said, he took his own life, so the police say. We say he was killed. Nothing the authorities say will convince us. We know they cannot clear themselves of complicity in his death. Those who knew him well can say that he was strong in mind and body. He knew that one day he might be jailed, as so many other trade unionists have been jailed. Those who saw him in detention can testify he was in good spirits and very confident that the authorities had no charge to bring against him. The trade union struggle is an open struggle. Everything a trade union leader like Neil did or say was put before the workers who are union members for approval. That's how a union works, and that is the way that Neil conducted himself. Recently, inquest was reopened into Neil Aggett's death. It is now confirmed that his death was the result of his treatment at the hands of the police. He was tortured, he was beaten, he was subject to brutal conditions. People saw him being dragged down the corridor, thrown into his cell. Yes, the death of Neil Aggett was a tragedy for those who knew him, for his family and his friends and his comrades. But it was also a key moment in shaping the country. The mass strike to protest his death on 11th February 1982 was the first such action in decades. It signaled a new confidence by the working class and the willingness to break down barriers. Old registered trade unions, often based among coloreds, Indians, and whites, joined hands with the new unions that emerged in the 1970s. At a time when efforts to unite the working class, as a force against apartheid, against capitalism, and in a single federation were breaking down, Neil's death provided new momentum towards unity. He was the 51st person to die in detention with trial. He wasn't the first white man to be prosecuted through banning orders, nor the first white man to be jailed without trial. But his death underlined both the brutality of the apartheid security apparatus, but also underlined the revolutionary non-racialism, universalism, and humanism that was so important to the anti-apartheid movement and rebellion within the country at the time. It has been said in a recent issue of COSATU's magazine, The Shop Steward, in a paper by Zakele Kele, that Neil's death injected renewed energy and urgency into the drive to establish COSATU, the Congress of South African Unions, Trade Unions, which was launched 40 years ago, end of this month, 40 years ago in 1985. Neil had not just played an important role in the unity talks, but his unwavering commitment to worker-led organizing, non-racialism, grassroots democracy, said Kele, helped shape the Federation's founding ethos. The annual Neil Aggett Labour Studies Unit lecture is named in honor of Dr. Neil Aggett for this reason. The Neil Aggett Labour Studies Unit, based at Rhodes University, is named in honor of Dr. Aggett. In our small way, we try to carry out his legacy. We work with labor movements, advocacy groups, we carry out research, we carry out workers' education. We are non-sectarian, democratic. We focus on developing the capacities of the popular classes rather than substituting expertise for that. We put expertise in the hands of ordinary people, and we try to find ways in which we can contribute to creating a better society. We have been committed to worker and working class education since our inception more than 10 years ago. We are committed to labor studies, the development of a new generation of labor studies specialists, and supporting worker education as part of a commitment to working with unions and with other working class movements. Now, it's my great pleasure to bring in our speaker today. This is Comrade Dinga Sikwebu. He is a veteran of the trade union movement. He is a product of the generation, let me say, one of the great stalwarts who still remains of the generation of 1976. As a young man, you were involved in protests, meeting every day at one stage, trying to work out what to do in a society which created oppression and division. In the 1980s, he was increasingly involved in a range of structures like Soldru and ILRIG, which were helping develop and assist the labor movement. He himself served as national educator of the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, one of the largest industrial blue-collar trade unions affiliated to COSATU for many years. Of course, NUMSA has now taken a slightly different direction. But I think we all know Comrade Dinga is someone who doesn't take sides with anyone except the working class. Doesn't take sides in the divisions. His whole life is a testament to his commitment to the working class movement. And I think with that, even now he's retired, as I said earlier, I don't think Comrade Dinga understands what a retirement is. Because he's still so busy. Even today, he's done one class today, a meeting before that. Now he's giving the lecture. Tomorrow he's jetting off somewhere else. I think he likes doing this. And it's a nice thing in life to have a job that you love, but also to have a contribution to make to society. Dinga's talk will be looking at, I will just read out the title and then I'll let him introduce this properly. COSATU at 40. Decades of political alignment and entanglement. Now, 40 years since the Great Federation arose, launched in Durban at Curry's Fountain. Where are we now? I think the country is not quite what COSATU expected, and maybe COSATU is not quite what the country expected. But when we look at things, we need to take a historical view and look very carefully at what happened. I think there's a lot to learn from the past. There's a lot of great things, and maybe some things that can be examined a bit more. I don't want to say more. With that, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to hand over to Comrade Dinga. Comrade Dinga, let's give him a big round of applause. Just one small thing. Comrade Dinga will present. After that, we will take questions. If you're online joining us, and welcome, very, very strong welcome to all of those joining online. You can put your questions in either as a hand when we get to that point, or you can type them. We'll address those. We'll also take questions from the House. Dinga, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lucian, and good afternoon, comrades, and good afternoon to many of the comrades and friends who are online. Firstly, let me thank the Neil Aggett Labour Studies Unit here at Rhodes in Makanda for the invitation to give an annual Neil Aggett studies for this year. Although the labor movement played a central role in the struggle against apartheid, there are few programs that celebrate the role that labor played, that celebrate its leaders and activists, and that researches that history. Unlike before, labor studies in the academy are no longer fashionable. And I would like to congratulate the unit for continuing to do this work. I also appreciate that the lecture coincides with the week-long Vuisilemini Workers' School. The fact that we are celebrating the life of Neil Aggett today shows how from one generation the baton is passed on. Vuisilemini passed the baton to younger unionists, and Neil Aggett died doing the work that Vuisilemini passed on to him, And hopefully, by celebrating their lives, we'll be able to learn from what they did. Now, in a week's time, this country's biggest trade union federation celebrates its 40th anniversary. And it is for this reason that I decided to give this afternoon's lecture the title, COSATU at 40 Decades of Political Alignment and Entanglement. Just to say a few words in addition to what Lucian said about Neil Aggett. Neil Aggett was a participant in the summit that started a series of meetings called the Unity Talks. The meeting took place in Kwalanga in Cape Town in August 1981. And Neil Aggett was part of the delegation that went to that meeting, representing the Food and Canning Workers Union and the African Food and Canning Workers Union. These were the two unions that are predecessors to what we call today the Food and Allied Workers Union, FAW. As we have heard, 7 months after this meeting, which was discussing how to bring together unions that were emerging in the 70s and in the 80s, Neil Aggett was murdered in police custody. Now, Neil's death triggered the first collaboration between unions from different political traditions. As we have been informed by Lucian, immediately after Neil Aggett's death, a call was made for a 30-minute work stoppage across the country on the 11th of February, 1982. And this is important to note. At the time when this call was made, unions that recruited mainly African workers were fragmented. They also belong to different political traditions. The first grouping that existed at the time of Neil Aggett's death was the Federated South African Federation of South African Trade Unions, COSATU, which had 8 affiliates and a membership then of about 140,000. So this is one grouping. And this grouping of unions believed in working class independence, no affiliation to political parties, and playing a political role on the basis of the strength of the trade union movement. They were critical as COSATU of what they called populist politics. The second grouping that existed at the time of Neil's death was what I would loosely call the UDF unions. These were unions that were aligned, had an orientation to ANC politics. And many of these unions affiliated to the United Democratic Front, the UDF. And here I'm talking about unions such as the South African Allied Workers Union, SAU, a union that emerged from the Ford Motor Plant in Gqeberha, Port Elizabeth, then called Makusa, the Railway and Harbors Union called SARU, and other unions. And this grouping, or what I call the UDF unions, were very critical of the COSATU unions. To some extent, they criticized COSATU for not being affiliated to political organizations. Labels were leveled at the COSATU unions. They were called yellow unions. And sometimes the COSATU tradition was called a federation sponsored by the CIA. The third grouping that existed was the unaffiliated independent unions, similar to Neil Aggett's union called the Food and Canning Workers Union, and a union that was initially based in the Western Cape called the General Workers Union. The fourth grouping that existed at the time was a grouping that came out of the Urban Training Project, which was formed in 1971, and a group of unions that came together under what was called the African Affairs Department of the Trade Union Council of South Africa, called TAXA. And many of these unions relied on UTP to conduct training of shop stewards and workers. And it is this union in this grouping that initially established what is called the Council of Unions of South Africa, COSA. And we can say that COSA is the predecessor of what became known as NACTU today. There was the last grouping, which were colored workers' unions who had been part of a TAXA at some point, but had sort of left TAXA and had sort of remained independent. Not coming from TAXA, but an important organization at the time of Neil Aggett's death was a union called the Cape Town Municipal Workers Union, CTMWA. Now, as I said, when Neil died, these unions, which were at each other's loggerheads, were poaching members from each other. They decided to take solidarity action as a protest at the murder that had happened at John Foster Square. Beverly Naidu, who wrote a biography of Neil Aggett called Death of an Idealist, notes in her book that the strike, the 30-minute strike that took place, was the first national work stoppage in a 20-year period. It is therefore timely that we are having this Neil Aggett Labor Studies lecture on the eve of COSATU's 40th anniversary, because Neil's death and the protests that happened in response to his murder in a small way, brought together unions that were suspicious of each other. In a context of union fragmentation today, in a context where unions are not working together, the response to Neil Aggett's death demonstrates the need for unions to act or strike together, even if they march separately or belong to different formations. As I said, I am here to talk about the 40 years of COSATU and to focus on the political strategy that COSATU adopted. Now, over the 40-year period, COSATU has developed an engagement strategy that has many facets. On one hand, the Federation decided that it would align itself with the ANC and the South African Communist Party. But this alignment is not the sum total of COSATU's political strategy. COSATU has a multifaceted political strategy. It engages the state directly. It is involved in policy work through its parliamentary office. It engages portfolio committees to try and influence policy. And it also is involved in social dialogue through the National Economic Development and Labor Council called NEDLAC. Although maybe not too frequently, the union is also resting on its members to take direct action, either as affiliates or jointly as the federation. My focus is not on the entire political strategy, but it is focusing on the question of political alignment, meaning aligning with the ANC and the SACP. Before I go there, I think it is important to just state upfront that my position is that whether they admit or deny it, trade unions are political actors. Trade unions are political actors. In their article entitled Trade Unions, Politics and Parties, is a new configuration possible by Richard Hyman and Rebecca Gamrell McCormick. The two authors list 4 reasons why trade unions cannot be apolitical or abstain from politics. The first reason they give why trade unions are political actors is that for unions to play a meaningful role in pursuit of their members' interests, they, the unions, have to contest the state. Noba uyatanda, noba awuthandi, if you have to pursue the interest of your members, you have to engage the state. And the reason is simple. the state remains the central institution in shaping relations within the workplace, in the family, in the factory, in industry, and in society. The state remains central, and its policies and actions can only be contested politically. For any union to be relevant, they need to be political. So when we're talking about COSATU's political alignment, this is not a call for a retreat from politics. Because, as I say, unions are political actors. The second reason that Hyman and Gabriel McConaughey give why unions are political actors is that the state underwrites, codifies what in the labor movement we call the management prerogative. The power of the capitalist class, the power of employers is underwritten, is determined by what the state formulates. Unions, therefore, cannot abstain from engaging the state to have legislation that protect members and their communities. The third reason that the authors give is that the state is involved in the regulation of the labor market. It is the state that influences what the price of labor should be and also how labor is reproduced. Both the production and reproduction of labor are political acts, again, underwritten by policies of the state. Lastly, Hyman and McCormick argue that collective bargaining is not immune from politics. Outcomes of collective bargaining, which is wages, are influenced or even most of the time eroded by inflation, cost of living, and tax. The workers' standard of living is also linked to outcomes of a collective bargaining. But that's not enough, because the type of social wage that exists in society also influence workers' standard of living. The questions of who covers the cost of health, education, and transport are important for workers' living standards. When in this room, comrades were talking about austerity, it is important that austerity in the main attacks the social wage. And therefore, it is important to see collective bargaining and what happens in the economy in terms of economic policy as complementary terrains in which the labor movement cannot abstain if it wants to serve its members. In assessing COSATU's strategy of alignment, I am not calling or questioning the political posture that COSATU and other unions in South Africa have taken. As I said, it is my strong belief that for unions to play a meaningful role, they must be political. What we must therefore assess is how they play the political role. And to think this for myself, I thought that it was important to identify four different ways in which unions can play a political role. And for clarity in my head, I have put this in categories. The first category is to be political but independent, and I call that political independent. Siyamba kunye maqabane nathi cwaka. Hey, yabona ile bhaji ndinxileyo ngoba. So the first one is what I call political independence. The second category is what I call political aligned, meaning you are political, but you are aligned. The third category is what I call political affiliated. And number 4 in my categories is political overlapping. Now, I've created this for myself so that I can think clearly. Now, what do I mean about these 4 categories? Let me start with the first one, political independence. All the categories are political, but the unions who decide to be political, they do so differently. So the political independent unions is that they are political but not aligned. They play their political role independently. They will form alliances on a case-by-case basis, dependent on an issue. And given the shifts in the political terrain, they may also shift who they align with, but they take an independent stance. That's category 1, called political independence. In the main, I think that the stance taken by COSATU was political independence. They were not aligned. They were not affiliated to the United Democratic Front. They refused to join the UDF, but decided that they will play their political role from their base independently without affiliation. Siyamba kwenye comrades. So that was what I call political independence. The second box that I have created for myself is political aligned. Now, in this, the unions align themselves to a political organization or a political party or parties. They also agree on what is a shared common political vision. And I suggest that COSATU from 1990 opted for this option, political aligned. The third box that I have created is political affiliated. And political affiliated takes various forms. Trade unions sometimes form a political party. They urge to form a political party, or they affiliate to a political party. Now, COSATU did not affiliate to the ANC, which is why I'm putting it in the political aligned box. Historically, unions like the TUC, the Trade Union Congress in Britain, were instrumental in the formation of the Labour Party. And for a while, they had a link between, there was a link between the TUC and the Labour Party. In fact, the TUC had block votes within the conferences of the Labour Party. Although the link had been terminated, over the time some unions remain affiliated to the Labour Party. So that's box number 3. And we've seen in the African continent, in Zambia, in Zimbabwe, where trade union federations, maybe not affiliated, but were sponsors of the formation of political parties. I think Msimelelo, the initiative by our union, the Metal Workers Union of South Africa, NUMSA, in forming the Socialist Workers Revolutionary Party, put that initiative in what are called political affiliated, although they remained there. They were sort of instrumental in the setting up of this. The other, the last box is what I call the sort of political overlapping. Now, by political overlapping, I'm thinking of where there is overlapping membership, there is also overlapping leadership, and there may also be reserved seats in the structures of the party for trade union leaders, quotas. And this, if those who are closer, not only has AMCU formed a Labour Party in South Africa, but also there is an overlapping between the AMCU leadership and the Labour Party that AMCU has formed. So, comrades, those are the 4 boxes in which I think that we can maybe look at how unions have played their political role. Political independent, political aligned, political affiliated, and political overlapping. Now, these boxes are just for us to think together clearly. The boxes are not so tight because you'll see sometimes the unions form a party, but they keep a distance from it. But I think it's important to have these 4 boxes so that we can assess the existing unions and their political orientation. But also, I think it will help us to think how we get out of where we are. The last thing I want to say about the boxes is that the first 3, okay, the one, let me start, the political alignment, the political affiliated, the political overlapping, there is something that they share. And that is, they have some belief that unions are limited, that unions need a political party to play a political role, which is why they align, which is why they affiliate, which is why they go for this overlapping political approach. And I would put these 3 in what I call, they subscribe to the limitations thesis. And most of this, what I call the limitations thesis, is directly taken from an important pamphlet that was written in 1903 by V.I. Lenin, the revolutionary leader of the Russian Revolution when he wrote what is to be done. And basically what Lenin said is that unions, and through their struggles, were limited. They would not be able to go beyond what he called economic consciousness. That what was needed is a political vanguard party that will inject from without the political consciousness. And this is important for us here in South Africa because the limitations thesis, most of the time, directly taken from learning what is to be done, is so strong in the trade union movement in South Africa. So the three political aligned, political affiliated, political overlapping, I would put them in the limitations thesis group, or what I call pessimism about the role of unions. The political independent group, or the box, I think has a more optimistic view about the role of unions. The unions can play a political role, they can have alliances, but as political actors, they can do that independently. Now, having put these boxes, where do we put COSATU's political strategy over the last 40 years? Now, it is my view that by aligning itself with the ANC and the South African Communist Party, COSATU's political approach fits into the second box. And the second box is that of political alignment. The alliance with the ANC and the Communist Party, what is called the Tripartite Alliance, is formed after the unbanning of the ANC in 1990. And COSATU decided that it would align itself with the two political organizations and formed the Tripartite Alliance. Although the alliance is formed in 1990, the 5 years before then, COSATU was under severe pressure to align itself. And there were big battles within COSATU about this issue of alignment. I had to remind myself about some of those debates. And last week, I spent some time at the University of the Witwatersrand, where the COSATU archive is kept. And I was reminded about things which I knew but had forgotten. At the launch of COSATU in 1985, the question of political alignment, meaning being aligned to a political party, was postponed. The decision was that this must be something to be discussed later, not in 1980 at the launching Congress. The second Congress was held in 1987 in July. And at that Congress, COSATU and the affiliates of COSATU that historically came from COSATU were attacked, harangued, criticized, yellow unions, not understanding the National Democratic Revolution, workerists. And this came mainly from two guest speakers. And the first speaker who went on a frontal attack on COSATU's non-political alignment was Peter Mukaba, who spoke on behalf of SACO. The second speaker there was Mefumo Robe, who spoke on behalf of the United Democratic Front. I don't have time to quote what they exactly said, but this is interesting reading because their argument was not only that the only route for COSATU was for political alignment, meaning alignment with a political party. They were also attacking some of the worker and officials of the other unions, like my union, NUMSA. And they attacked them because not only the politics, because they were white. There was a racial flavor in the attack, that the workers in the unions that were refusing or not agreeing to alignment were being misled by white intellectuals. So if you have time, I think it will be important to look at some of these documents. Now we know that a few before the unbanning, COSATU became part of the mass democratic movement, which was a coalition that emerged because of the restrictions on the United Democratic Front. The formal alliance with the ANC and the SACP was consummated in 1990. And the alliance, Tripartite Alliance with the ANC and SACP, has gone through different phases. And COSATU has tried different methods and tactics to influence the alliance and the policies of the alliance. So I want to just now talk about some of the ways in which they used, and then I'll also talk about some of the phases which I understand the alliance seemed to have gone through. The first tactic or strategy which COSATU used was tie the partners to some agreements, accords, and even policies. And the first of such an arrangement was on the eve of the 1994 elections. Coming from mainly NUMSA, the union argued for what they called a reconstruction accord, that you needed an accord between the ANC and the labor movement that we will support, vote for you if you agree to do X, Y, Z. Big debates took place about this idea of a reconstruction accord. And there was a pushback that in politics, you can't have a collective bargaining where you sign agreements. So the idea of a formally signed accord was abandoned to what was called a reconstruction and development program. And this was to serve as the manifesto of the ANC, the basis of the new democratic government, and also was to be used as a way to canvass workers to support the ANC. The important thing was that tie the partners to an agreement or policy. The second strategy that COSATU has used over time, in addition to agreements, agree on a manifesto, tie the partners to a policy is deployment and list processes. So in the first election, COSATU negotiated that 20 COSATU leaders must be put on the ANC list. And again, reading some of this in the archive, it's clear that this was in discussion about the fact that the parliament was going to serve both as a parliament, but also to draft a new constitution. So the 20 people, and this I discovered, were being sent there for them to take forward the interest of workers in the constitution writing process that was to unfold. But what was not clear, when the constitution is finished in 1996, what happens to the 20? There was also no clarity about how they are accountable to COSATU. In fact, the idea that they should be accountable to COSATU was something that was opposed. So COSATU released 20 people, its leaders, to go into parliament and into the constitutional assembly without those members being clear about how they relate to their base or the union movement that released them. And this led to one writer to describe this move as an exit without a map. The third way which COSATU has tried to influence its partners is, and I'm sure many of the comrades will be familiar with that, is what became known as swelling the ranks. Swelling the ranks. What this meant is for COSATU and its affiliates to encourage workers, shop stewards, to join both the ANC and the SACP to take leadership position in the branches, in the structures of this organization, with the idea of that they would influence from within the two organizations. Now, if we look at how this has panned out in terms of the alignment, by 1996, the platform that had been agreed as the election manifesto, the Reconstruction and Development Program, is abandoned in the form of the office that had been established called the RDP office, which the first General Secretary of COSATU, J. Naidu, had occupied in government, was closed, and he was moved to be the Minister of Telecommunications. And we know that in July 1996, there is then the adoption of the Growth and Employment and Redistribution Program called KIEM. So quite soon, the plan of tying the allies to agreements, deployment, swelling the ranks, clearly was not producing the results that were desired. And at the Central Committee of COSATU 2003, idea about how the Federation has to fight for different outcomes. And what the analysis said is that the first decade of democracy went to the ruling class and the capitalist class. We have the labor movement now to ensure that the second decade, 2004 going forward, is a decade of the working class and the poor. And central in this idea of a decade of the working class and the poor was the formation, informally, I would say, bilaterals of what was called a left socialist axis. And the left socialist axis was nothing else but a toenadering and cooperation between COSATU and the South African Communist Party. And the idea was to strengthen what is called the left axis. As part of that, or the unfolding, we know of the disastrous strategy of picking a slate in the ANC. So between 2005 and 2007, because things were not working and were not producing the results that were required, COSATU decided that in the fight in the ANC, they would have a slate in which they will mobilize, canvas for, and that's how we got Jacob Zuma. COSATU was central and key in the what is called the Zuma project. And those who questioned, criticized, attaching and appending COSATU to the Zuma project were dealt harshly in the unions, in the affiliates, and in COSATU. Now, we all know that Umshinwam did not come. And there was disenchantment with the Zuma project. And as there was this disenchantment with the Zuma project and influencing this by picking a slate in the ANC, we then began to hear louder calls for what is called the reconfiguration of the alliance. So presently, we are in a phase where you go to any COSATU meeting, you go to any constitutional meeting, the demand in terms of political orientation is for the reconfiguration of the alliance, and that the idea of the ANC leadership of the alliance is called into question. There is also, although there's still a debate, now the idea that maybe it's time for the SACP either to lead the alliance or for COSATU to support the call by the ANC to stand independently electorally. Now, comrades, I don't have to do a balance sheet of this, because the shifting strategies and the changes in the strategy are also an indication of a failing strategy. A strategy that does not produce the results. And I think that it is time for the union movement, not COSATU, to think about the issue of how they should play their politics in society. And maybe for COSATU, which is turning in a week's time 40, this is an important time if you are facing midlife crisis. And I just said, I think interestingly, the idea of midlife crisis has its roots in the feminist movement. So it's important to, yeah, but I think it's I think the 40th anniversary as part of a broader evaluation of the labor movement, not just on issue of politics and political alignment, on what has happened to the unions. It is important to look at this. Clearly, if you subtract the times when it's before elections and manifesto periods, every COSATU Congress, every COSATU policy-making structure has pronounced how dysfunctional the alliance is. In fact, when the alliance was formed in 1990, the Congress that followed this, there was a resolution about the dysfunctionality of the alliance. So the alliance has continued since 1990. Every Congress says that the alliance is dysfunctional, but the resolve part of the resolution is always we reaffirm. Maybe we'll reconfigure, maybe we'll do that. And in another time, when I wanted to be naughty, I said in my union, but the alliance is like utikolosh. Because although we speak about utikolosh, and we have not seen utikolosh, but we fear this tikolosh. So we reaffirm the alliance a few seconds after we said it's dysfunctional. And my argument is that we need a balance sheet. And for many times, as I said, COSATU has done that. I think what hasn't been there is how the alliance not producing what the labor movement wants is to look at how the alliance has led to what are called political entanglement. What do I mean by political entanglement? I think political entanglement, I'll give 4 examples. The first one is that because you are so invested in the alliance, you even lose yourself because you are part of the South. I've been recently in meetings where the report says this alliance with the ANC goes back to 1928. So there is a rewriting of the history. Now, but when they say it goes back to 1928, it's clearly to the Native Republic thesis. But formally, the alliance with the ANC COSATU is 1990. So the whole history of the federation gets written from what I call the entanglement with the allies. And without saying this, I don't know whether comrades have seen the poster for the 40th anniversary. There's 40, and then there's 70. Can anyone guess what the 70 stands for? 70? Look, my comrade. The 70 stands for the 70th anniversary of the South African Congress of Trade Unions, SACP, which was a partner of the ANC in the 50s. And I've written about this, and I've publicly said at COSATU, if you go to COSATU head office and you just look at the pictures, there's no COSATU. And the direct line of COSATU goes straight from COSATU today to SACP in the 50s. The union that was the bedrock, the federation that was the bedrock of COSATU is written out of history. John Komomo came from COSATU. The leaders of COSATU were products of the politics of COSATU. But if you look at COSATU's history, COSATU does not exist. So, entanglement, you lose yourself because what you're trying to ingratiate yourself with the partners. You try to write yourself and your own history in the history of the partners. The second thing about political entanglement is that you also underestimate your power. In the union movement, everyone says unions are limited, unions cannot play a political role, they need a political party, a vanguard party to play this role. But if you look at the action of the labor movement, it's been political. So there is a disempowering thing about this political alignment. And what we've seen, entanglement just create this disempowering effect. Thirdly, we've seen how, for instance, COSATU has entangled itself with the factions in the ANC. And in the different unions, in the federation, we see this entanglement. The fourth thing I just wanted to talk about is what I'd say, what alignment has also done is also bring into the labor movement what I call the cultures of a national liberation movement. What do I mean by cultures of the national liberation movement? Something that was not there, I can speak about my own union. There's something called deployment. Now, the word deploy is a military term, which means you can wake up today and sleep somewhere else because you are deployed. And the way this is viewed is that it's revolutionary to deploy. So, like in the liberation movement, like the ANC, these cultures that come from the sort of liberation movement, military style politics, have been brought into a democratic organization. So a union that has 6 national office bearers, in each region or province, there's a deployee of the office bearers. And the word of the deployee is more powerful than that of the regional executive committee because the person is an interpreter of the line of the union. So in an REC, can we refer to the deployee to interpret what's the position of the union? Now, I'm making this as an example. There are many others I can do about how when you align yourself, like it's happened over the last few years, you also susceptible to imbibing what are called the bad cultures of the partner. And now this there are certain things that are taken for granted. And I think these are the results of entanglement. Now, what do we do? I'm sure everyone else, okay, yeah, this pensioner, you know, is talking, but what do we do? I think that, as I said, there should be in the union movement an evaluation and a balance sheet drawn up, not just about the political strategy, about everything that the unions have become, including a close look at how these are gendered organizations. My feeling is that we should explore the box that over the last 40 years we've been jumping, the box of political independence. And again, when I say political independence, I know when you say political independence, the Marxists of some organizations from independent from whom? From which class can you be independent? Political independence, as I defined it, is that you are political, but you do your political engagement without affiliation, without being aligned to a certain political party. And you do this from case to case and what you want to achieve. And you also are resting on the strength of your movement, which is the labor movement. And I think that the theme of the Vuisile Mini School about the prospects for revival, there can only be a revival if we are optimistic about the role that unions can play. And that requires that we shed off what I call the pessimistic limitations thesis that is dominant in the movements and in the Communist Party. A political independent approach to how labor plays its politics today is made more important because of the fragmentation that we see in the labor movement. Like the week before the 11th of February 1982, where through Neil Aggett's death, we saw different unions coming together and laying the basis of reaching out. I think a political independent approach will be crucial for the coming together of the labor movement and coming out of the fragmentation that exists. The last thing I want to say about why the political independent approach may be something that we need to consider is because we are in an era of coalitions. I'm talking now about governance, coalitions. And therefore, what the ally is going to do is not too dependent on what an alliance summit said. It's also dependent on what coalition it is involved in. And I think that maybe the idea of an alliance and having to influence that because that's the majority party. I think the era of coalitions that we're entering in South Africa needs a rethinking of this. I think, comrades, I've put something for us to discuss. And again, I would like to thank Nalsu for asking me to give this lecture. As I said, it was a double ticket. I had to do the lecture and I had to do this. And with that, I want to thank the organizers and thank you for listening to my ramblings. Thank you very much.
I can also sing.
I've left here without singing. Eh? Okay.
Let's honor comedy Dinga with the song.
I remember this song. Hey,
Hey, wena.
Hey, wena.
Hey, wena.
Hey,
Hey,
wena.
wena.
Hey, wena.
Hey, wena. Hey,
Hey,
wena.
wena.
Hey, wena. Hey, wena. Hey, wena. Hey, wena. Hey, wena. Hey, wena. Hey, wena. Hey, wena. Hey, hey, wena. Hey, wena.
In fact, looking at the people online, of which we had many, one says, we are singing along. Never will I forget this song of comrades. Thank you, comrade, for a great lecture. I think if you've joined us late online, this is the annual Neil Aggett Labour Studies lecture hosted by the Neil Aggett Labour Studies Unit, Rose University Makanda, partnered with the Vuyisile Mini Workers School, which we've been running. I'm Prof. Lucien van der Walt. We have a full house here and a full house online. What we like to do at this stage is to take some questions. If you're online, you can either signal your hand and we'll try to have you live, or otherwise we can maybe write that. I think I see a question online. I think it's from Roger Edkind at Amandla. I'm going to take questions as a package, then give to Comrade Dinga. We're going to avoid a dialogue. Okay. Roger, do you want to speak quick? We'll take you then.
Yeah,
and then
yeah. Thank you, Lucien, and good afternoon, comrades. And I think with all the talk of alignment, I, as a pensioner also with a history in NUMSA, align myself with Comrade Dinga in being opposed to alignment. So I think that's the first point. I think it's very important, and I think the history does bear out that position. I just wanted to raise one point, and that is around the issue of the Communist Party and the National Democratic Revolution. Because I think it's important for us to address this issue, as the Communist Party appears to be, maybe, possibly going to stand in the elections next year, although we don't know, independently. And I think what's important is that how the National Democratic Revolution and the theory of the National Democratic Revolution relates to the adherence to the alliance that COSATU took. And it's the National Democratic Revolution. Basically, the theory says the working class in this period of history, however long this period of history may last, cannot effectively represent itself. It has to be represented through the progressive bourgeoisie, or whatever you want to call it. And I think that theory underlines the alignment, that the position that COSATU took. And COSATU took it maybe a little bit earlier also than Dinga was saying, although not formally, through the debate around the Freedom Charter. And COSATU adopted the Freedom Charter in 1987, if I recall correctly. So I think we need really to critique the theory of the National Democratic Revolution, because otherwise we don't get at the roots of the problem. Thanks very much, comrade.
Thank you, Comrade Roger. I've noted one or two comrades in the House. Comrade, when you get up, we're going to put you on the camera, so you can also just introduce yourself. I also want to stress, remember, there are many different federations at our school here, different unions, and NALSU itself is non-sectarian, non-aligned. I think it's important to have spaces for debate and to hear from comrades. So with that.
Okay. Thanks, Chair, for this opportunity. And I wish to say thanks, Tabitha, for your submission. I like your jacket because it's affecting the way that I can relate to you than before. The issue for me, I'm talking on a matter of the experience this time around. I'm a product of SACP, the teacher union. I am Comrade Kivindaba from PSA and representing PSA, the TFF sector. My memory and my experience about SACP in particular, you said it's an independent. And for me, I said, okay, it's fine for you. You can see it as independent. But what I know is that for every election that comes as SACP, we used to say SACP for ANC. And all workshops that we attended were the workshops that were organized by the ANC. And to us as unbanned general membership, we knew that we are affiliated to the African National Congress. And we know that we will vote as members of SACP, we will vote for the ANC. And that was made because you look at the history. Here in the Eastern Cape, Comrade Matomela was the chairperson of SACP. He became a member of parliament. You look at Comrade, I think it was Shepherd, but the first minister of Labour, Comrade Yes, he became also, and the rest, I can't finish them because of the time. Many members of SACP, leaders of SACP, became members of parliament. Now, today, if you say to me, SACP is independent, then I'll have to scratch my head to say it's independent. But SACP can't be independent. Comrade to us, you know. So that's why I'm saying you make me to scratch my head regarding that view. And where I stand today, I'm coming indeed from PSA, which I can say PSA is independent, not politically. Yes, on matters, even on matters of national interest, they have a view. Even the current one now, the issue of germs, maybe we'll say that is politically, the issue of the 2 ports. You know, we had a few that thing, you know, and there are other matters, but you for me, I would say you cannot put PSA and SACP in the same pot regarding political affiliation. So I'm saying that is my take from what you were saying here. And there's too much evidence regarding that matter. That's what members of SACP said. They are part of the JMC, the Joint Management Committee, to go into the issues of the PSPC. So they go along with COSATU, which is, you know,
yeah.
For the sake of time, thank you.
Thank you, Comrade. I think it's Comrade Smelo Yankees.
Evening, everyone. Reluctantly, let me start where he ended. My name is Smelo. So there's this firm view that COSATU would have been a problem, say after 2008, on the basis of the rise of the public sector. And their proximity to leadership at the expense of industrial trade. So that characterization, I want to give things as part one of the factors that would cause the decline. And it's as if that move of your legal cause that is declining in terms of membership content. And you know, sir, led by your department of research, would have done work analysis post 2012 when we would have realized that Umshinwa makes so we are putting hence that radical stance. The COSATU need to consider away from this Tripartite Alliance. And COSATU viewed UNUMSA as an irritation. But of course, there were other elements. Organizing some of the chain, all these and allow me to jump or asking a question and then said what is true. So my comment it is so I'm not what needs to be done is a NUMSA project a failed project. In terms of evidence, one might say yes. Why are you not then taking up the skill and continue to rebuild your brother's house instead of burning your house? Why don't you improve and keep what has worked? Was Mumsa was saying in terms of political affiliation under where you allow now to civil society organization. Nelson Mandela mentor is rich with that history. As in Chris Army, another municipality where the United Front would have made inroads. No matter how small those inroads were, the point of making is that was able to unite the workers and the working class, close the chasm between the labor, industrial workers, and the civil society. It's quite to set aside this. So family, let's consider that if it has failed, let's agree, accept those failures and work on it.
Thank you, Comrade. There's a question in the back. If you can also maybe introduce yourself.
Thank you. My name is Marco. I'm a local citizen, Ghana. Now, the theory and the book reflected of COSATU. I had the privilege to be in then Port Elizabeth, that is now Becca. And I know the COSATU drive was worker control and labor independence. But what preceded that was that
settlement negotiations happened. I mean, that was the reason for the formation of COSATU. That was the reason for the formation of the UDF, to be forerunners for the final settlement. That happened in the 80s. I also had the opportunity to be incarcerated with this concept of detention without trial. And strange enough, there were COSATU leadership coming in, and they were portrayed as enemies of the struggle. And in detention had to be isolated and to be dealt with and to be politically schooled. So hegemony was the call of the day. I mean, it's during the same period that intestine violence happened between political groupings. Black consciousness had to be destroyed at all costs so that the Congress movement can move. Now, I'm interested in the entanglement, sorry, because you've just said that COSATU have lost its identity, it lost its history, because now it starts to romanticize itself with something that happens 40 years ago. That has nothing to do with the current disunity of workers. That should lead, because that was the ideal with COSATU and all the other independent unions, that these unions have identified, because they were black unions, they've identified that they have a political role to play. They will be in the forefront of the politics of the day on behalf of the black masses. I mean, there were no political activity when they entered the fray. Remember 1960, people were banned, organizations were banned. 1973, the union movement starts emerging. So we've seen the same trend in the politics. They romanticize, if they want to sell the constitution, they romanticize it with the Freedom Charter. Almost to blindwing us and blindfold us from the reality. I know there's a question somewhere, and it's more complex because I could have identified myself with the processes as a young student in PE, and also as a member, because I was kicked out of higher learning and I became a sub steward of FAO. And then FAO Eastern Cape was kicked out of COSATU for challenging the doctrine at the time. We were kicked out because I was on my way to a COSATU local sub-steward meeting in East London when I was told, hey, you know, we're not a member anymore, you are kicked out. So I can identify with it, and I can agree that we need, I got my friend here, we need, I'm not entirely sure if the SACP is the vanguard. I'm not entirely sure, but we need a vanguard, and it should come from unions. It should come from unions.
No, thank you, comrade. I'm gonna take, I must just note, there is the two that were put up. I see the one is Comrade Tulani Bukani, who is from the Independent Komani Residents Association. He says, thank you for the wonderful presentation and for Nelson. He says, for me, COSATU has lost its historical militant identity, become institutionalized with the state structures. Leadership is viewed as professionalized, detached. Rather than confronting this, COSATU seems to me comfortable preserving the existing system. It must return to grassroots organizing. So I think Comrade Tulani is more of a comment. There is Dina Maklanchana, sorry, it's not very clear on the screen there. The only way for workers to do it is under the vanguard, participate to make it strong, don't complain about what happened. We got to free workers from their chains. So I think those are comments. I've noted a comment there from Comrade Chris, which I'll come to. I just want to quickly just also ask a question. You're talking about the rewriting of history, right? So if we look at SACP2, that's 1955, maybe going into the 60s. But if we look for most of the 20th century, Black trade unions are not aligned to the African National Congress, sometimes with the Communist Party and sometimes with the Industrial and Commercial Workers Union, actually very hostile to the parties. I wonder if there's, and then of course there's your examples like COSATU and so on. Is there anything we can learn from these other experiences in South Africa? Because as you say, the history isn't just COSATU, 1985, and SACP2, 1955. These unions are going back 120, 130 years now. Some of them have been very powerful. Is anything we can learn? I know for COSATU always used to place a premium on the lessons of history. Comrade Chris, I'm going to hand over to you now for the last question. I think we'll probably take this as the one and only round, I suspect, with the way time is looking.
Thank you. I think.
And to introduce.
Oh, okay. Afternoon, everyone. It's Chris here from SACP, Islanda. Leadership, I think one of the challenges that we need to look at when we talk about COSATU, firstly, look at the slogan. It says Entanglement and SACP. And when you look at that, it means whatever is happening to the next person, it affects everyone. But my main concern with COSATU is that coming from SACP, you would find that SACP had its own challenges, where the previous leadership has taken over Syria and installed money from SACP. That is well known. And when we have to approach COSATU in terms of ensuring that, at least as the mother affiliation there, going to be shielding us and assisting us as SACP, COSATU is putting us as that class that is not careful, or I put it as a faction. Because SACP doesn't even have a voice if COSATU is making anything. We don't even have a voting right. We can't even say anything with regard to COSATU. Now, it's even worse when we talk about the political aspects where COSATU is mostly with ANC. Because it's going to be the votes 2027, 2026. The very same COSATU will go to an extent of mobilizing SACP members to go and vote. Now, how do you vote for someone to be empowered? Whereas when we have to speak your voice, they don't even permit you to. So my question is that has COSATU linked itself so much in politics that he has forgotten that its core aspects, it is not politics, but the employees. Because we feel like we left behind, instead we are a scapegoat or use a wheelbarrow, put it that way, to just put people on the forefront, and then when they are done, we forget about us as the people. So that is why I'm having a concern with COSATU, because as a SACP, if COSATU calls for anything, you don't even have a speaking right. Yeah. Now, it becomes a question to us to say, how do we now support an affiliation that we know we don't even have a voice when it comes to it, because they are not even recognized. To the fact that we've been losing money maybe unwisely previously, but has it come to a point where even now that our very own affiliation cannot even come and interject and assist ours as a union to say, guys, okay, at the least how to pay the funds and ensure that this thing is sorted.
No, thank you, Cole. Nice. I suppose I think you must take the podium again. And I think we take that as it's a big meal there. So I think there's a lot to say, and then I think add any concluding remarks, and then we will do a closure.
Yeah. All right. I thank you, comrades. I always believed that in political discussions, anyone who says, I have the answers in my back pocket, be suspicious of that person. Because what we're dealing with are complex issues. So I'm not going to try to answer everything. I thought we're starting a discussion. Chris, let me start with you, which is maybe to just emphasize. My view is that the unions must be political. This idea that, unions are not for politics, I was arguing here. You can deny it, but to be able just to service your member, to deliver higher wages, as I was trying to show, you will have to engage the state and win things and show that there is unemployment insurance and now those are politics. I mean, you've got to engage the state. So I think the idea of a apolitical unionism defeats the purpose. So my starting point, political. Okay. Where I'm saying is that, okay, how do you play those politics? That's where the boxes start. And I said, look, maybe looking at history, maybe there'll be a fifth box, but with the time, okay, these 4 boxes. Gilindaba, I think maybe we're not getting each other properly. COSATU is not, the Democratic Teachers Union is not in the box on political independence. It's not in that box. In fact, it's part of COSATU about political alignment. So maybe when we're outside, we can, when you're doing this and it's streaming, I can't be a flip chart Marxist. Well, if I was doing this, I would have written and put the boxes on a flip chart, and then we can talk about the. So my thing, Gilindaba, is that COSATU, I mean, if you look at what you were describing, I don't have to say it. It's again this idea of alignment. You align to the ANC, you align and you try and influence and yeah. I mean that's my so that the people online, Comrade Greener, both of us live in Joburg. We used to be in the same branch of the SACP. We can pick up some of these discussions in Joburg. My quick things to you and the comrade at the back. I don't think. Okay, let me start there. Most of what I've said, part of it, I was invited to the Central Committee of the Communist Party in June. And I gave the same, more or less, talk at the party. And we had a discussion. And they asked me and said, we don't say things we want to hear, say things. To Comrade Greener and the comment, I don't think that now that this alignment strategy has not produced or delivered, it's to switch and look for the same strategy, but now it's another party. So that's why I said, look, the limitations, this is deep. The NUMSA Socialist Workers Revolutionary Party, it's the same politics that you need a party, a revolutionary, you need a vanguard, you need something. So it's just that now it's not the ANC, it's SWRP. But it's the same approach, it's the same politics. It's again, if you now want to switch and say, oh, let's move this and give it to the vanguard party, which is the SACP, Comrade. I don't think I would say we're not faced with a thing of whether you support pirates, chiefs, or sundowns. We need a rethinking about the political role of unions. It's not just switching teams from this team or to that team. Because when you switch to that team, you'll find that team, you're going to get involved in entanglement in that team. So my view is that I think this idea of alignment is a problem. And I think, yeah, what is required is to be political, independent. And that does not mean, for instance, if there are elections, you educate your members about the politics of each party, and you may say, look, under the circumstances, or there's a rise of neo-fascism, to block that, this is what to support. But it's case by case. It's not like because we believed in the Freedom Charter and the NDR, we are tied to this, and then you get this, this alliance was not formed in conference room, it's sealed in blood and you know, you get all the mythology that comes with it. You'll do it, okay, this is what is for our members at this point, this is what we want to do, there's the political education that goes with it, and you do that. Clearly from what you want to do. I think I'm similar to okay, let me just put it blunt. The NUMSA moment was squandered. It's gone. It's gone. So, and the reason it was squandered is, again, that the politics that were dominant there were sort of a version 2 of SACP. The unions are limited. You need a party. It's the same politics. It's just that they were acting it themselves in a different way. And what I'm arguing about is that we need a political independence. And I mean, you know, I was central in the NUMSA thing, and so there were certain differences that were hidden there. You know, should we have a maybe loose united front? There were other people who wanted the Vanguard Party, and I think over time the Vanguard Party people won, and the idea of a loose. So yeah, I mean, my feeling is that unfortunately we can't go and do something there, and it's squandered. It's gone. We'll have to think about what to do going forward. But I mean, the thing about this, I mean, we can talk about COSATU, and we didn't have the time to do that. You know, my view is, I mean, I sit some now in the meetings, and I hear some of the unions in COSATU about the problems with the ANC. This is what we were saying in 2012, 2013 as NUMSA. But my view, Msimelelo, is not to now say, but we said so now, you saying this 10 years down the line. You know, my metaphor is always, as an orchard owner, you must never complain and go and ask each apple, why are you not getting ripe? At the same time. They can be on the same tree, but they will never get ripe on the same day. So my thing is that we can go and say, look, we said this and we didn't, it doesn't help, we're here now. And the thing is that to start thinking about what do we do. And my feeling is that maybe there's a moment to I mean, I did say about how the political, I'm going to leave it at that, the political independent is maybe the thing to consider. And I'm not saying, you know, I've got an answer, this is the formula. We've got to think together about what we do. Also, I mean, we know the challenges of the unions. We're asking about the unions and the changing composition of the unions. But also we have many people in communities, either organized, either some are not organized. We need a type of political strategy that's flexible. I mean, I didn't go into this. I mean, if we're talking of an ecological crisis, and floods and I'm just how we do the politics. It can't be, this structure and then meets that structure. I mean, I know where, the people were studying, okay, if you're going to start and think, you've got to form provincial structures, and then you have a PEC, and this, and an RSC, and a zonal. We need something more agile. And my thing is that, Roger, I know I didn't, turning this into an article for Amanda, it did not work out. I do think that the issue of the National Democratic Revolution is important. Again, it's one of things that have become entanglements. I mean, I was reading a report, and people here talk, we as COSATU are red unions. This is a Congress Federation. So my thing is that, yes, those politics have become dominant. And one of my criticism I give to some of my comrades in the Communist Party is that this idea of standing in elections and what, most of it also they haven't relooked at the politics. So it's still the NDR. We want to contest, but we want the alliance to remain. So I do think, but there's probably another historical. I mean, I said to the comrades, I'll leave it here, Lucian. I said to the comrades, I mean, this idea, I just can't find my paper. Similarly, maybe I did a paper in the union in the 2000. Is the ANC leadership of the alliance pre-configured? That was the title. Is it a God-given that? I said no, because if I'm to come to the idea of a national democratic revolution, when the Native Republic thesis was adopted in 28-29, there were other people who said, yes, we've got to take the question of the rights of the natives. But that struggle must be led by the Communist Party, not the ANC. So this idea of the NDR being led by a nationalist movement was interpreted differently in South Africa than in China, where the NDR, if you call it, was led by the Communist Party. So those debates, for instance, about, unfortunately, the party is not looking at that and said, look, even our idea of it, and the people that were on the margins in the debate on the Native Republic, like Banting, may have been right. So I mean, we can have a discussion on it, Roger, and maybe you can have an article on the NDR in Amanda. Amanda.
I think with that we've come to the end of a very good talk, but hopefully the beginning of a very important discussion. I see in the comrades somebody mentions there that we must be cautious about jumping to ready-made solutions. We must look at the past, I think, learn from the past, even complicate the past. I think there's a lot to be learned. We also must, I think, avoid this year zero idea. Everything must be done from scratch. It's a past, it's a toolbox. Look at the tools, which work, which don't, which need to be modified. The danger is immediately we want to build something with a design and we haven't even seen if the design works or is appropriate. So to put that together, I want to say we brought this to the end, but I think hopefully we have also started an important conversation. And this is a conversation for all unions to have. And we know even unions themselves are not politically homogenous. So we have to think there also how we manage those discussions in a way that contributes to workers' unity and not more and more splintering. So I'd like to thank Comrade Dinga for his time. like to thank everyone who attended, all the comments. And with that, I close, and I hope we can maybe even close off with a bit of a song, if we can. Thank you. And any final words?
Anyone who wants to continue the discussion in the bar can come back. When Muslim was going to the gallows, he sang this song.